There were 172 days between August 15th, 1969 and February 3rd, 1970. And those 172 days were two significant cultural moments in our nation's history. One is very well known, one not so much. August 15th, 1969, Woodstock took the world by storm as 400,000 young people gathered in upstate New York in a little bitty town in a field to celebrate music. But much lesser known was a moment that occurred on February 3rd, 1970 in the little town of Wilmore, Kentucky, where a normal chapel service at Asbury College went for 185 hours. And God had a moment that sparked a movement in that generation of young people. When you think about the difference between those two moments, Woodstock, which even students today, many of them are familiar with. We just marked the 50-year anniversary of Woodstock this last summer of 2019. But a much lesser known moment that I believe impacted the world and culture much deeper than Woodstock did is what's known as the Asbury Revival of 1970 that began in a normal chapel service on February 3rd, 1970. What we're going to be talking about today is what happens when these moments with young people collide with culture. And we're going to be talking about moments that mobilize movements. I'm Jeff Eckart.
I'm Jason Brewer. And this is The Thought Factory.
The Thought Factory podcast is brought to you by Never the Same, cultivating students through biblical discipleship and spiritual disciplines using theology, community, and technology. Learn more at neverthesame.org.
Here we are, Season 7 of the Thought Factory podcast. We're glad you're with us. We can't wait to get into this season. We've got all brand new material as we normally do. One of the things you're going to notice right away that's a little different is I am flying solo for the first few episodes. Jason Brewer's on a little bit of a sabbatical break, but I've got some special co-hosts that will be joining me for each one of these first few episodes of this season. Can't wait to introduce our co-host here in a few minutes. But if you're familiar with what we do, we travel all summer for NTS Camp. I personally logged, I think, about 7,500 miles, mainly on the road, some in the air, traveling all over the United States, connecting with students at our summer camps, NTS. We had an amazing summer. We continue to grow. If you are new to what we're doing, check us out. It's ntscamp.com. It stands for Never the Same, NTS Camp. Organization that we represent is Never the Same. So if you check out neverthesame.org, you can find out more about what we're doing and what's happening in our ministry. But we just had this phenomenal summer. And summer is such a critical time in youth ministry circles because one of my friends calls it's like harvest season for youth ministry. It's where a lot of trips, a lot of events, a lot of relationships are built. And we just came off of this really fun and impactful summer at NTS Camp, connecting with our friends all over the country, seeing God change lives, seeing so many cool things happen, a lot of momentum for things that we're doing. And we're just glad to look back over the summer with some great memories. We're also, though, really looking forward to jumping into this season of ministry and this season of the podcast. We're glad that you're with us. We hope you go back and check out some of our latest episodes. We recorded our last, I think, that was released in May. What's really cool is we look back, Jason and I a few weeks ago looked, and our listenership grows every summer, even though we take a break. So we're glad that those of you that are new to the podcast are jumping in here with us. And one of the things that we talk about here is ministry about students that's for students, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. We're looking forward to you being with us as we're continuing to plow on into some great information and some guests. And we do research, which we did this summer. We'll be using that research from students themselves, several thousand of them from around the country, to guide a lot of our conversations that we'll be having in this season and also in Season 8, which will be after Christmas. And we're going into something pretty phenomenal next year. And if you've been familiar with our podcast, you've heard us talk about it, but it's something called Claim Your Campus 2020. This event that will be happening on July 4th weekend of 2020 in Kansas, in a field at a place where we are gathering 100,000 students from 10,000 schools to be talking about how we can help these students make a difference with Christ and sharing the gospel on all those school campuses that will be represented at this event. Our goal for Claim Your Campus 2020 is to equip these students to be able to pray at their school once a week, to know how to verbally share their faith with their friends, and to do something to serve on their campus. Pray, share, and care. Those three simple ideas. There'll be artists joining us, artists like For King and Country and many others that have come on board. And it will be a festival-type atmosphere with an equipping purpose. There's never been an event done quite like this, and it'll be a once-in-a-lifetime event. We hope that you consider being a part of this, what we believe will be a historic moment in our nation. And if you're listening to this and you're an adult, find out more, claimyourcampus2020.com. Learn how you can be an advocate for one school in your community and help get students to this important and phenomenal event that will be happening. So that's claimyourcampus2020.com. We're going to be talking about that a lot this year because it's not only us, but it's 48 other organizations so far that have come on board for this event that will be happening July 4th weekend 2020. And so we hope that you can be there with us to celebrate what God's going to do in this generation, that moment. So without further ado, let me get into what we're doing today and introduce my co-host for this episode. We're talking about moments that mobilize movements, and today my co-host is none other than Phil Joel of Newsboys fame. If you're familiar with the band Newsboys, he joined the Newsboys and then took a little bit of time off, I think for about 12 or 13 years. He might tell us that here. And then recently rejoined with Newsboys United and is on tour with Newsboys United. Also author of the book Redwoods in Wales, which is a great book for youth workers. I would encourage you to pick that up. And Phil comes to us today having literally performed and stood in front of millions of people, young people, youth workers, people all over the world, and sharing these thoughts about what happens when a moment mobilizes into a movement. He's going to be sharing some of his personal reflections on that, as well as a discussion about these two moments that we've already talked about, Woodstock and the Asbury Revival. So we're excited to get into that today. Phil Joel, it's good to have you with us, my friend, and we're going to jump into some exciting stuff, but thanks for being with us today.
Oh, you're welcome. This is going to be fun.
So we're talking about a couple moments here that are linked. The first one, August 15th, 1969, a little music festival happened. Let's talk about Woodstock.
Little music festival outside of New York. Oh, well, obviously I wasn't born around that time, but I remember being given, when I was a teenager, the live album that was recorded at that music festival, and there was a documentary made after it about it as well. And I remember listening to this record, just going, this is killer, and it went on to become, I think, still is one of the top selling live albums of all time. And there were the most amazing bands on there. Santana and Hendrix, of course, was there. The Who played at it. Jefferson Airplane. Gosh, there was Joan Baez. Who else was there?
Yeah, Joe
Cocker. Yeah, Joe
Cocker
Cocker was there. Sly and the Family Stone. It was a pretty serious lineup. I think those bands that was actually a big launch for a lot of those bands at that time, because they didn't expect as many people to be at that festival. I mean, it was going to be, it was happening. They had the Who there and Hendrix, who were big time, but they didn't expect as many people to turn up as turned up.
400,000.
Yeah, they still can't count it. I think it was, between 400 and 500,000 is what they estimated, and you see the aerial footage of it. It was just an incredible event that no one knew was going to blow up and really turn into. It was really the beginning point, the moment that tagged that generation, the counterculture generation. It really, I kind of galvanized, I think, what that generation was about, and I made them realize, man, there's a lot of us, and we have a voice, and they headed in their hippie-ish direction, after that. And, quite honestly, I think they were heading in certain directions in a good way. But at the end of the day, without God in the middle of it all, it's,
Yeah.
God's love in the middle of it all is going to fall apart. But
Well, it was long hair and bell bottoms, basically, right? Does that sound familiar?
It does. It does.
Some of us still do that.
I know.
Today.
Who?
I'm not going to mention any names. But yeah, that I think what you said to me, as I see it, that was the legacy of Woodstock, is that the music was obviously just incredible, but it was what it did to unite that generation. It seems to me like you had all these people, of that age that all felt the same, but when they were all together, it was like, oh my goodness, we have a voice, we all feel the same. And I think that moment really defined not only that generation, but it seemed to really define a course of American history culturally. Yeah. What happened there at Woodstock?
Yeah, no doubt. I think it stirred the entire nation at the time. I mean, all sorts of tumultuous things were going on. 1969. But and of course, at that point, there wasn't social media or the internet or all these kinds of things where people sort of gather. And so this was a massive sort of. It was a statement being made, I think, like, hey, we want to do things differently. We want to live our lives differently. And yeah, it must have been a pretty powerful thing for all of that 500,000 kids to be involved in, to look at one another and go, hey, we can do this. Maybe we can move into the future and do things differently, in a counterculture kind of way. And some good came from it, and some not so good.
Yeah.
But it definitely stirred a movement, in America, and probably in the world. All eyes are on America at that time too. So.
And then from that, I one of the things that started not long after that moment of Woodstock was a young student named Janine, who went to a small little school in Kentucky. She went to Asbury College. She was a junior, and she'd had a heart for her school, and she started praying, and then she got 5 other friends to join her, and they just began spending their days. They committed to get up 30 minutes early, spend time in the Word and prayer, and they wrote down what they observed and what they learned as they read the Bible, and they got together on a regular basis, I think weekly, and shared that. That morphed, and pretty soon 5 other groups did the same thing, so I think now they had 36. And then they presented at their chapel. So this started in the fall of 1969. Nobody knew what was happening or what that would turn into, but what happened was this group began meeting and asking God to meet them at their school at Asbury College in Wilmore, Kentucky. Small little town, small little college, insignificant in terms of, not well known, nothing like Woodstock, didn't have the publicity, the promotion. And then on February 3rd, 1970, so putting it in context, this prayer little group and movement started by this one student started in the fall of 1969, probably just a matter of a handful of days after Woodstock. But 172 days after Woodstock, as this little prayer movement grew at Asbury, on February 3rd, 1970, God did something very special at this, what was scheduled to be like a normal, I believe it was Wednesday chapel service that went for the next 185 hours straight. Wow. As students confessed, as they worshiped, as people shared and really were very vulnerable in that chapel service to share things in their lives that they were confessing that God had showed them, and God met with them in such a significant way that it spread even in national media, on the news, but also students from all over the country. In fact, Jason, our regular co-host, his dad, who was a student at Houghton College in New York, another Christian college from a different part of the country, drove to Kentucky just to see what God was doing. And this sparked a movement across the nation that I believe has had a significant impact in our culture. And what I think is interesting, Phil, is that these two moments in time, Woodstock and Asbury, happened a few days apart within, the same year. And God used each of these moments to mobilize movements. So Woodstock, we talked about that countercultural movement, but then something else sparked in the 70s, kind of on the other side of the equation. That's something called the Jesus movement.
Yeah, it did. It was Larry Norman, Randy Stonehill, all those second chapter of Acts, I think, was a part of that whole bit. Yeah, I mean, gosh, I kind of, I have these moments sometimes. I'm like, man, I wish I could have been there and seen what that was all about. I mean, I'm sort of a direct descendant, if you will, of those forefathers of contemporary Christian music. They were encountering God and writing about it and singing about it and sharing, and artists who were mainstream artists, had record deals there, just started writing about Jesus, this Jesus they'd met, and bam, the Jesus movement over there in Southern California began. I think Calvary Chapels was born out of that whole movement, and
Yes.
yeah, a lot of wild stuff. Again, I wish. It sounds like it wasn't so much about we have an industry now. This Christian music kind of industry, if you will. But it seemed like that back then was just so raw and so honest, and so, not that it isn't honest now, but it was just so. From what I hear, stories of, when I've met different guys who were there, they just said, man, we would do these shows and there'd be 20 of us and we would all be sharing the stage and playing for each other and just worshiping and doing our thing. And there was no sort of like headliner, if you would, God was the headliner. It was just kind of mind blowing. And
Yeah, that there was that Jesus movement of the 70s then really birthed modern Christian music, what was known and still referred to CCM, contemporary Christian music, which, kind of now has morphed into different things. But it started and it impacted the industry that you're in, music, and it's impacted all of culture. And it reminds me that, when you look back to that, it all links together, but one student who had a heart for her school campus. And I and hearing your testimony, she could never have imagined how that simple, pure heart for God meeting with her and meeting her fellow classmates on her campus, what that would do to impact the world. But it reminds me of this quote that we talk about around here in our ministry, is that, history is shaped by the intercessor and the person that's praying, the nameless, faceless mob of believers throughout the centuries that never sit on stage. Their name will never be remembered in history books, but in the history books of heaven, they'll be known, and they are known because they were the ones that shaped history. And I go back and pinpoint someone like Janine, a junior at her college that had a heart for her school, and that's what we're looking at today. When we think about one person with a singular passion and a heart, and willing to go before God in prayer. And hearing her share a story, she's like, I didn't really know how to pray. I just had a desire for God to do something. And I loved hearing that, because I think sometimes we think, well, we have to know what we're saying, and we have to, know the right people, and we have to know the Bible, and we have to know all this stuff. And God doesn't need all that stuff. He just needs someone whose heart is pure before him.
Yeah, no doubt. Because I know in my life, any sort of major moves of God, major moments that instigate sort of a movement in my life, they've always been started with prayer. I mean, it's me petitioning the Lord, crying out to the Lord, saying, Lord, I need you. I want you. Give me direction. Show me. And I think about how I actually came to be here in the US and playing for Newsboys and that whole thing. I was in a space where I knew God wanted to do something, had something in store for me. I didn't exactly know what it was, and I began crying out to him, saying, Lord, I want what you have for me. Whatever it is, I want what you have for me. And he began to show me some things, and I then began to sort of prepare. I didn't exactly know what I was preparing for. But I began selling stuff, and then I had this, like an inkling. Someone mentioned something about the US and Christian music there, here in the US, and because in New Zealand I didn't really know much about it, but I knew I wanted to do music and share, share with people what God has done in my life. And so I began to prepare, and I got a passport, and I'd never been on a big airplane, but I got a passport. And I got a visa, an extra 3 months or 6 months in total to be in the US. And then I just kind of waited. I was waiting, but I felt like I was positioning myself for something. And I continued to pray, continued to prepare, but all the while I was sort of positioning for something. And then a phone call came at 3 o'clock in the morning. And it was a Newsboys. And they said, hey, we need a bass player. Can you play bass? Can you be on a plane in 36 hours and fly to Los Angeles? And I said, yes, I can. And that, my life was changed after that. But it all began with me really crying out to the Lord, saying, Lord, use me, do whatever it is you want with my life. I'm ready. And then him starting to show me things, bits and pieces, and continue to lead me in preparation, and boom, away we went. A moment happened that changed the course of my life, but it all began with petitioning the Lord, with prayer, and so I think I see the same things in the Asbury revival, the Welsh revival, even the Jesus movement. I'm sure it began with just people just crying out to the Lord, saying, Lord, meet our generation, do something, move, we're ready, we're positioning ourselves to see you do something great. And man, he does.
Yeah.
He does. Anytime I feel like I'm slipping into, like, I don't know, fear or whatever, I always look back on that moment too and go, hang on, God can do whatever he wants. I've seen him do whatever he wants in my life. I've seen him make someone pick up a phone and call me on the other side of the world at 3 a.m. in the morning. So all I need to do is just stay faithful, continue to prepare for whatever it is, and position myself to see the Lord move. And he does.
We're here talking about moments that mobilize movements. And Phil, you mentioned that moment when you got that call from the Newsboys. That was a moment that, was in the phrase, that moment mobilizing the movement. You've been in front of literally millions of people performing. You've seen and done so much, and it all started with that phone call, that moment that I know, in conversations with you, you've pointed to that significant moment. Let's talk about some other moments in your life that stand out to you, that have been times that you can point back and say that was a moment that maybe it did or didn't at the time seem significant, but you would point back and say that was a game changer in terms of the trajectory and the direction of my life.
Yeah. Well, I remember, when I was 14 years old, attending a Luis Palau crusade in Auckland, New Zealand, where I'm from, and I went along to that. I'd grown up in church, and whatnot. But I remember going to that event with kind of an expectancy in my heart. I kind of knew what I was going to do. I knew that when it came down to it, and the this invitation was given, I was going to roll down the front. And sure enough, it came, and he invited anyone who wanted to receive the Lord, to come on down, and boom, where I went. And it was me kind of, putting a stake in the ground. I don't remember what I prayed or what exactly, transpired as I was down the front there. But I know in my heart it was me just saying, yes, Lord, I'm in. And, thus began a whole new chapter in my life, or a whole, new direction. So I love those moments, and I love that that we get to be a part of facilitating those moments. And like tonight, playing here in Ohio, and we don't know who's going to be out there, but we just hope that this moment tonight, turns into an absolute change of course for people's lives. Change. So I just, it's fun to be a part of facilitating those moments.
Yeah, a lot of times those moments, if you mentioned the Luis Palau event when you're 14, for me it was a Billy Graham event when I was 9 years old, and really for the first time felt like I made my decision to follow Jesus for me. And I've looked at other moments, and a lot of times those have been connected to events. As we're sitting here talking, I was just reflecting that earlier today as we're recording this, I was meeting with a pastor, and he was asking me about just some of the course of events that have brought us to where we are and me to where I am today. And I was telling him that I have this weird thing with November 1st. And so on November 1st, 1998, I moved to and started work at a church in Grand Rapids, Michigan, where I still live, so 21 years ago now. And then it was 10 years later to the day, and I didn't think about this at the time, but I recognized it later. I was at a youth specialties conference in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and God downloaded the vision for me to leave my job as a local church pastor and to start the ministry Never the Same. So I came home and processed that, and over the course of the next few months tried to figure that out, tried to be faithful to that. Ended up working throughout the next summer in my job there at the church, and then took a 40-day sabbatical. And then randomly, my first day at Never the Same was November 1st, 2009. So it ended up being 1 year later to the day. And and that day, November 1st, when we had an arson at our office, at our ministry office back in 2015, it left us without a place, kind of homeless as a ministry, and for the next few months. And then we're looking at buildings. A building ran across my desk. I looked at it, and it looked interesting, but then I saw that it was available November 1st of 2015. And that, because that date just caught my eye, I kind of perked up and thought, and then that ended up being where I'm sitting right now in the same building that we've been using. And so God's
crazy
used that moment for me. But Phil, you were one of the first people when we met that I shared this idea of this event, Claim Your Campus 2020, in this moment. And that phrase, moments that mobilize movements, have that phrase has just been ringing in our ears as we're looking forward to July 4th weekend 2020. Talk a little bit about how you feel about why this event is significant for you and what you think it could be.
Right. Well, like I say, I mean, I love, first off, I just love this next generation coming through. They're amazing. They're an amazing bunch. I mean, they've got a lot of challenges, obviously, in front of them. There's different sort of things coming after their hearts. But they just have this wonderful energy and potential, and man, I just want to see this generation just fall in love with the Lord and have an encounter with God that changes the trajectory of their lives. And so to be a part of Claim Your Campus 2020, I'm just expectant, and I'm praying that the Lord would do what only He can do, which is just zap people's hearts. He zapped mine and continues to. And if kids can have an encounter with the Lord out in that field, it'll change everything. You can deliver kids, as much information as you want, but a true encounter with the living God, that's a game changer. That's a whole different story. So I'm just excited.
Well, it reminded me of a conversation with our friend, Phil Darren, recently. We were talking about the state of culture, and a lot of times as a youth worker, I just get so protective over students in this generation with all the things they're facing, and the wave of anxiety and suicide and depression and other things, the confusion about who they are and the lies they believe, and the myths about God as a loving father to them. And Darren reminded me, in the midst of all that anxiousness that we might feel about just having an overprotective heart for these kids, he just said, Jeff, all it takes, just what you said, Phil, all it takes is a moment. All God needs is a moment. And I just believe that's so true. It's been true in my life. I see it true every summer at NTS camp. We see God have a moment, and then years later I hear from these students that go, my life was changed in a moment. And it was, like you said, it was an encounter with the living God. And so that idea of these moments that mobilize movements, it's not just a corporate thing like, well, it's going to spark this, this mobilization in this moment in a field on July 4th for Claim Your Campus 2021. It's going to spark this prayer movement. And we believe and foresee that it will, but I think even more importantly is that it will spark a movement within the life of a young person to continue to follow hard after this God that loves them so much and to walk with him as a result of that moment. And that's what I know your heart. That's what we're the most excited about, is what will happen in the life of a young person when they experience him in that field.
Yeah. And what'll and the ripple effect of that. We just don't know. That stuff gets me excited. I think I get more excited about some of the things that we just don't know than what we do. We get to see, we hear these, stories. Wow, my life changed there. But think about this. Okay, that person's life may have changed. They had an encounter with God, and it changes the trajectory of their life, and they began to walk with the Lord. What happens to that next year? And they go on and have kids, and hopefully they're passing their faith on to those kids in a real way, in an honest way. And then you start talking. This is generational stuff. This goes far beyond that moment. And I don't know. This stuff gets me really jazzed.
Yeah, me too. And Phil, I just appreciate so much your heart for this generation and what you continue to do on their behalf. We're excited again to have you there leading worship for us. I've seen you in that zone, and God has gifted you just beyond being a performer to be a worship leader. We're glad that you're going to be a part of it. As you're listening to this, I want to encourage you to go to claimyourcampus2020.com. That's where you can go to learn information about this event. You can also sign up to become an advocate, and that's where it all starts. We need advocates that will represent these schools, because students will not be able to go to this event unless there is an advocate signed up on behalf of their school. And so it's important. It's $99 to unlock that school and to become an advocate. That gets you a ticket to the event. That puts you in the stream where we can begin to communicate with you and help encourage you to network and know how to pray and get students there to the event. For students, it's only $49 for the event itself. We just want to make it accessible for everyone to be able to go. We believe it will be a watershed moment in this generation for them to meet with God. 10,000 schools, 100,000 students. We want you to be there with us for Claim Your Campus 2020, July 4th weekend. Phil, we're grateful for your time today. Thanks for kind of co-hosting with me, and look forward to seeing you there, my brother.
Yeah, can't wait, man. Well, thanks for having me.
The Thought Factory podcast is brought to you by Never the Same, whose vision is to see new generations transformed in Christ to further the kingdom of God. Learn more at neverthesame.org.